May 4th, 1943. 30,000 feet above Nazi Germany. A B-17 bomber fights through a sky filled with flak and enemy fighters. Inside the aircraft, at the waist gun position, a 42-year-old private named William Clark Gable fires a .50 caliber machine gun at German planes trying to kill him. 6 months ago, he was the biggest movie star in the world, mourning the wife he lost to a plane crash. Now he's here, in the frozen hell of aerial combat, doing exactly what he volunteered for, except something has changed. He came to Germany to die, to let enemy bullets reunite him with Carole. But in this moment, with his crew depending on him and German fighters closing in, Clark Gable discovers something he thought he'd lost forever: the will to live. This is Episode 3, Rage into Battle. January 1943, Polebrook, England. A military airfield 60 miles north of London, home to the 351st Bombardment Group. Private Clark Gable arrives on a cold, gray morning, carrying his duffel bag across muddy fields toward barracks, where he'll spend the next several months, assuming he survives that long. The base is Quonset huts, runways, and massive B-17 flying fortress bombers that will carry American crews into the most dangerous airspace in the world over Nazi Germany. Clark has been assigned as a waist gunner, one of the most exposed and dangerous positions on a B-17, responsible for defending the aircraft against enemy fighters that attack from the sides. It's exactly what he asked for, what he wanted. The other men watch him arrive with curiosity, skepticism, and resentment. Everyone knows who he is. Everyone recognizes that face, and nobody believes Clark Gable is really here to fight. They assume it's a publicity stunt, that he'll pose for photos and fly back to Hollywood without seeing real combat. But Clark doesn't leave. Over the following weeks, he proves something they didn't expect. He's serious about this, genuinely committed to flying combat missions, and he's not asking for special treatment. He trains with the crews, learning the complex choreography of a B-17 mission, the way 10 men must work in perfect coordination to keep a bomber flying through enemy fire. He learns to operate the twin .50 caliber machine guns at the waist position, where he'll stand in freezing cold at high altitude, watching for enemy fighters and firing when they attack. The training is brutal and exhausting, but he never complains, never asks for breaks, never mentions his age or status. The younger men start to respect him despite themselves, because Private Gable does the work without excuses and treats them as equals rather than subordinates to a Hollywood king. Slowly, gradually, the 351st Bombardment Group begins to accept that maybe Clark Gable is the real thing. But then the Germans find out he's there. February 1943. Nazi intelligence discovers that Clark Gable is stationed at Polebrook and flying combat missions with the 351st. The information reaches Berlin and eventually lands on desks of people who recognize the propaganda value. Capturing or killing Clark Gable would be an enormous victory for German morale and a devastating blow to America. The order goes out through Luftwaffe Command. Any pilot who shoots down the aircraft carrying Clark Gable will receive the Iron Cross, one of Nazi Germany's highest military honors. Suddenly, Private Gable has become the most valuable target in the European theater. When American intelligence learns about the bounty, they inform the 351st, and the news spreads like wildfire. Having Clark Gable on a mission now means every German fighter in the sky will be hunting specifically for that plane. The men who fly with him face a terrible calculation. His presence has just multiplied the danger of every mission, turned them into priority targets, made them more likely to be attacked and less likely to survive. Some airmen are angry, resentful that his fame has painted a target on all of them. They argue he should be grounded, sent home, removed from combat before he gets everyone killed. But others defend him, pointing out that Private Gable didn't ask to be famous and has trained as hard as anyone to earn his place. Clark hears about the Iron Cross bounty and feels the weight crushing him. He came here to die, yes, but he came to die alone, to let German bullets end his suffering without dragging anyone else into his private hell. Now he realizes his death wish could kill his entire crew, that his selfish desire to join Carole might murder 9 other men who have families waiting, futures ahead, reasons to live that he no longer possesses. For the first time since Carole died, Clark feels something other than grief and guilt. That something is responsibility. The terrible understanding that other lives depend on his actions, that his choices will determine whether young men go home or die in flames over Germany. The death wish doesn't disappear, doesn't transform into a will to live, but it becomes complicated in ways he didn't anticipate. March 1943. Clark is assigned to a specific B-17 crew for his combat missions, and he meets the 9 other men who will fly with him into the most dangerous skies on Earth. The pilot is a lieutenant from Ohio, 24 years old, who makes it clear that rank and fame mean nothing inside the aircraft, where survival depends on everyone doing their job correctly. The co-pilot is younger, 22, fresh-faced and terrified. The bombardier sits in the nose, responsible for dropping payload on target. The navigator plots routes through enemy territory, trying to avoid the thickest anti-aircraft fire. The radio operator maintains contact with base. The flight engineer monitors aircraft systems. The ball turret gunner hangs in a suspended sphere beneath the bomber. The tail gunner sits alone in back, most isolated, watching for fighters that attack from the rear. And then there's Clark, the waist gunner, who will stand in the middle of the aircraft manning 50 caliber machine guns, the position that requires standing in the open fuselage where wind and cold and enemy fire can reach him most easily. These 10 men must function as a single organism in combat, each person's survival dependent on everyone else doing their job perfectly under extreme stress and violence. The crew looks at Clark and wonders if a 42-year-old movie star can really handle what's coming. Clark looks back at them and sees young men who deserve to go home, who have lives waiting, who shouldn't die because a broken widower wanted to join his dead wife. Something shifts in him during those weeks of training together. Not healing exactly, not recovery from grief, but recognition that his death wish has become entangled with their lives in ways he can't ethically ignore. He's still broken, still carrying the weight of guilt and loss, still wanting to escape the unbearable pain. But now he's responsible for 9 other men, and that responsibility demands something he thought had died on Mount Potosi. It demands that he care whether he lives or dies. May 4th, 1943. Clark's first combat mission. The target is Antwerp, Belgium, where German submarine pens threaten Allied shipping. The 351st will fly there in formation, drop their payload, and attempt to make it home through whatever hell the Luftwaffe throws at them. The briefing happens before dawn. Officers point to maps and photographs explaining the target, the route, the expected resistance, and the survival statistics that everyone knows but nobody wants to discuss. Bomber crews have a 1 in 4 chance of completing their required 25 missions. After the briefing, crews suit up in flight gear, layers of clothing designed to keep them alive in minus 40-degree temperatures at altitude. Clark pulls on the heavy leather jacket, the oxygen mask, the parachute harness, transforming from Private Gable into an aerial gunner preparing for war. They board the B-17 in pre-dawn darkness, each man taking his position, running through final checks. The engines roar to life, deafening even through the leather helmet. The bomber taxis to the runway, accelerates down the concrete strip, and lifts off into the gray English morning. They form up with other bombers, creating a defensive formation where each aircraft can support the others with overlapping fields of fire. The formation turns toward the channel, crosses the water, enters enemy airspace, and suddenly everything becomes real in a way that training never was. Clark stands at his waist gun position, watching the landscape far below, and he thinks about Carole, about the mountain, about the coin flip that killed her, and he wonders if today will be the day he joins her. Then the German fighters arrive. The Luftwaffe attacks in waves, Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s diving through the bomber formation, their machine guns and cannons tearing through aluminum and flesh, trying to knock down as many B-17s as possible. Clark sees them coming, dark shapes diving from above, and his training takes over. His hands move automatically to swing the .50 caliber toward the threat, his finger finding the trigger, the weapon jumping in his grip as he fires at the fighters screaming past. The noise is overwhelming, impossible. The roar of engines and guns and explosions creates a wall of sound that makes thinking difficult. Clark fires and fires, tracking the fighters as they dive through the formation, watching tracers arc toward them, not knowing if his bullets hit anything. The aircraft shudders as it takes hits, metal tearing, systems failing. Clark hears someone screaming over the intercom, one of the crew wounded or killed, he can't tell which. A B-17 nearby takes a direct hit and explodes in a ball of fire. 10 men gone in an instant. Clark keeps firing, his hands numb from cold and vibration, his face frozen behind the oxygen mask, his entire world reduced to pointing the gun and pulling the trigger. And he realizes something shocking. He doesn't want to die. Not right now. Not in this moment, because his crew needs him to keep firing, to keep defending this aircraft, to help get everyone home. The death wish that brought him here is still present, still waiting underneath, but it's been pushed aside by something more immediate, the survival instinct, the desperate need to keep living for just one more second, one more minute, one more hour. The fighters break off as the formation reaches the target area. The bombardier takes control, lining up the drop, and the aircraft lurches as thousands of pounds of bombs fall away. They turn for home through a sky filled with anti-aircraft fire. Flak explosions create black clouds of shrapnel that tear through formations randomly. Clark watches the explosions burst around them, watches other B-17s take hits, watches pieces of aircraft fall toward Earth. Their bomber makes it through somehow, and they limp back across the channel on damaged engines. They land hard, and when the engines finally shut down, Clark climbs out on shaking legs, breathing hard, alive when he expected to be dead. The crew gathers around the damaged B-17, and Clark realizes they're all looking at him differently now. Private Gable just flew his first combat mission and performed his job without freezing or letting his crew down. He's not a movie star anymore. He's a gunner who did his job. Over the next 3 months, Clark flies 4 more combat missions, and each one is brutal, terrifying, and survivable only through luck and coordination. He also films combat footage during these missions, operating a camera in addition to his gunner duties, capturing the reality of aerial warfare for training films that will help prepare future crews. The filming mission gives Clark an official reason for being in combat, but the truth is that he's become a real member of his crew in ways that have nothing to do with cameras or publicity. They trust him now because he's proven himself in combat, done the job, kept firing even when fighters attacked and flak exploded around them. The Iron Cross bounty still hangs over every mission, still makes them more of a target, but nobody talks about sending Clark home anymore. He's earned his place through blood and fear and the shared experience of almost dying together. Clark discovers something during these missions that surprises him, purpose, or something like it. Not healing from Carole's death or recovery from grief, but a sense that what he's doing matters in ways that acting and movies never did. The death wish is still there, still whispering that German bullets could end the pain, but it's complicated now by responsibility and duty and the understanding that his crew depends on him. He can't just let himself be killed because his survival is connected to their survival. The transformation is subtle, almost imperceptible, but the other men notice something changing in Clark over the weeks of combat operations. He smiles occasionally, makes jokes, participates in the life of the base in ways that suggest he's finding reasons to keep going beyond just waiting for death. The grief is still there, constant and crushing, but it's no longer the only thing he feels, no longer the total sum of his existence. September 1943. Clark completes his 5th and final combat mission, having fulfilled his agreement to fly enough sorties to gather combat footage for training films. The Army Air Forces wants to send him home now, back to America where he can edit the footage and help with the war effort in safer ways, because having Clark Gable die in combat would be a propaganda disaster. Clark considers arguing, considers insisting that he should keep flying for the full 25 missions that bomber crews are required to complete, but he knows the argument is futile. The Iron Cross bounty means every mission with him aboard is more dangerous, and staying would be selfishness disguised as heroism. So he accepts the orders, says goodbye to the men he's flown with, and prepares to return to America. His crew throws him a small party the night before he ships out. Just the 10 of them drinking bad English beer and telling stories about the missions they survived together. Clark realizes something that simultaneously heals and hurts him. These men are his friends, genuinely care about him in ways that have nothing to do with his fame, and he cares about them in return, wants them to survive and go home and have the lives they deserve. It's the first time since Carole died that he's cared about anything or anyone. The first crack in the wall of grief that's defined his existence for 18 months. The caring doesn't fix him, doesn't heal the fundamental brokenness, but it reminds him that connection is possible, that he's capable of feeling something other than crushing loss. The next morning, Clark boards a transport plane back to London, then catches a flight to America, leaving behind the 351st and the men who accepted him as one of their own. He carries with him his gunner's wings, his combat decorations, and the complicated knowledge that he came to England to die but learned something else instead. October 1943. Clark arrives back in the United States and is immediately surrounded by photographers and reporters who want to document the return of Hollywood's hero from the war. The press writes glowing articles about his courage, his service, his willingness to risk everything for his country. Nobody asks if he wanted to die, if he volunteered for combat as an elaborate form of suicide. They see what they want to see: a patriotic movie star who served his country. The Army Air Forces awards him the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal for his combat service, medals he accepts with appropriate humility while feeling like a fraud, because he came to war for the wrong reasons even if he eventually did the job correctly. Hollywood wants him back. MGM has films waiting, contracts to fulfill, and Clark discovers that he can't simply slide back into his old life as if nothing has happened. Everything has changed. He's still broken from losing Carole, still carrying guilt and grief that time hasn't diminished, still waking up most mornings wishing he could join her, but something else has been added. He learned in England that he's capable of functioning even while broken, that he can do a job and protect others and find small pieces of purpose even while drowning in loss. It doesn't fix him, doesn't bring Carole back or erase the pain, but it suggests that survival is possible even when it doesn't feel worth it. Clark returns to the Encino Ranch, to the empty house full of memories, and faces the question that's haunted him since the crash. How do you keep living when the only reason you wanted to live is gone? He still doesn't have a good answer, still doesn't know how to exist in a world without Carole, but he survived combat, did his job, earned respect, and that has to count for something, even if he's not sure what yet. November 1943. Clark Gable sits in his empty house in Encino, wearing his uniform, looking at photos of Carole, trying to figure out what comes next. He went to war to die but came home alive, failed at suicide but succeeded at being a soldier, and now he's trapped in the in-between, not dead but not really living. The death wish hasn't disappeared, hasn't been cured by combat or service, but it's been complicated by the knowledge that other people depend on him, that his choices have consequences beyond his own pain. MGM wants him making movies, America wants him selling war bonds, the military wants him working on training films, and everyone needs Clark Gable to be the person he was before the plane crash, even though that person died on a mountain in Nevada. So Clark does what he's always done. He performs. He plays the role. He becomes the person everyone needs him to be, even though it costs him something every day. He makes movies again, returns to Hollywood, pretends to be whole when he's fundamentally broken. But the cracks are there, will always be there. Permanent damage from losing Carole that no amount of time or distance can truly repair. The war changed him, not by fixing him or healing him, but by teaching him that he can function even while destroyed, that duty and responsibility can create purpose even in the absence of joy. It's not the same as being whole or happy or having a reason to live beyond going through motions, but it's some small foundation to build on. Private William Clark Gable flew 5 combat missions over Nazi Germany, earned his decorations, proved his courage, and returned home a hero. But the real war, the one that will define the rest of his life, isn't against Germans or Japanese. It's the war against his own grief, his own guilt, his own desire to stop existing because existence without Carole feels unbearable. That's a war he's not sure he can win, but combat taught him one thing. You keep fighting even when you want to quit, because the people depending on you deserve nothing less. Next episode. Hollywood wants the old Clark Gable back, but that man died on a mountain. And what came home from war is something else entirely. This is Legends of America.